Good evening, listeners, and welcome to Behind the Headlines. It is Monday, the 24th of March, 2025, and I'm your host, Adam Slonim. It is 111 days since the Victorian Premier was invited onto the show to discuss, why Melbourne is the anti-Semitism capital of the world. Tonight, listeners, we delve deep into a disturbing reality, a sinister exploitation that uses innocent lives as pawns, indeed, human shields, in a relentless assault upon our core values. This is not merely about criminal gangs or isolated acts of violence. This is a pervasive, calculated strategy that has turned the Jewish community once again into unwilling human shields in a broader war against the very principles that define our society. Consider first the appalling incident of the explosive packed caravan in Dural in Sydney. This wasn't merely an act of vile anti-Semitism. It was a calculated diversion by organised crime, manipulating community outrage and police resources to cynically use and abuse innocent Sydney Jewish lives as human shields for their own criminal agendas. Yet this exploitation doesn't stop with criminals. It extends chillingly into our political arenas. The Greens political party, claiming the mantle of environmental justice, and the very misnamed Jewish Council of Australia, overtly and shamefully attacking Israel and the Jewish community, and then use anti-Semitism as a shield behind which they launch attacks against the Australian Jewish community and Australia's very fabric. The racist Greens and the racist JCA exploit Jewish pain and have turned anti-Semitism into a political tool, in fact, a human shield that protects and legitimizes their divisive and dangerous ideologies. Talk about mirroring Hamas tactics. But this insidious strategy isn't confined to fringe politics alone. The Labor Party, tragically willing to sacrifice Jewish communities to gain votes from specific demographics. Labor politicians quietly distance themselves from Jewish concerns, allowing anti-Semitism to fester unchecked. By throwing Jewish Australians under the political bus, Labor hopes to score electoral gains from Muslim voters. A cold calculus that reduces communities to mere bargaining chips. Again, the Jewish community becomes a human shield, this time political rather than physical, behind which politicians hide their cynical electoral strategies. We even find global institutions complicit in this Hamas-like exploitation. The United Nations, International Court of Justice, and the International Criminal Court, entrusting with securing global justice, instead exploit Israel as their preferred target, consistently singling out Israel, scapegoating the Jewish state as a shield to deflect attention from the UN's own deep-seated inadequacies and biases. Israel and the Jewish people serve as perpetual targets, diverting security and scrutiny from brutal regimes around the world. The endless stream of condemnations against Israel creates a smokescreen, obscuring the untold worse atrocities committed daily by regimes the UN refuses to confront. Thus, Jews and Israel again become human shields. Their bodies and reputations are battered to safeguard the UN's institutional hypocrisy. My friends, this practice of using Jews and Israel as human shields is pervasive. insidious, and systematic. Whether manipulated by organised crime, political opportunism, or international institutions, the outcome remains tragically the same. Jewish communities repeatedly bear the brunt, exploited, and sacrificed to protect cynical agendas. We have a moral obligation to recognize and challenge this exploitation and reject these manipulations. To stand with the Jewish community, not merely as bystanders, but as active, vigilant defenders of justice and democracy. Only through collective vigilance and moral courage can we dismantle these shields of exploitation and ensure the protection and dignity of all Australians. My very special guest today is Colonel Michael Scott CSC. And Michael is one of those upstanders who refuses to be a bystander when he sees the world around us change in negative ways. And I'll come back to that. Let me give you a bit of background on this wonderful man. Michael has served over 30 years as an active duty Australian Army officer in the Royal Australian Armoured Corps, with operational experience in East Timor, Bougainville, Iraq, and 2 tours of Afghanistan. From July 2019 to September 2021, Michael was seconded to the United Nations as part of the UNSO force, the United Nations Truth Supervision Organisation. He resided in Jerusalem, and his mission covered the front lines and the border lines between Israel and Lebanon and Syria and Jordan and Egypt, where he travelled extensively. Michael performed higher duties as head of military in the absence of the Major General at the time. For his service, Michael was awarded the Conspicuous Service Cross by the Governor General in the 2023 Australia Days Honours List. Michael is a Duntroon graduate, holds undergraduate and postgraduate degrees from Australian universities, including an MBA, which I believe you're finishing now, Michael, in New York at the Stern School of Business. Michael is founder and chief executive officer of the 2023 Foundation, a charity dedicated to combating antisemitism. Because the events of October 7th and the resulting rampant global antisemitism has deeply impacted Michael. As I said, he will not be a bystander and is determined to do something about it. So Michael's abiding respect and affinity with the Jewish people, he has published in newspapers in Australia and Israel, and really is aligned and writes about Judeo-Christian values and the threats to the West that is coming from what is occurring not only in Israel but around the world. Now, I didn't know, but Michael in his bios told me that in October 24 you were made an honorary life member of the Emmanuel Shul in Woollahra in Sydney for services to the Jewish community. And having witnessed through UNSO Israel's first-hand remarkable story, it is actually our real pleasure to have Michael come on to our show today. Michael, welcome to the show, and thank you for coming on, especially as it's New York evening time.
Hey, Adam, it's a really great pleasure to be with you this evening, my time, and your audience. Thank you very much for the kind invitation.
Michael, tell us a little bit about yourself and where did you grow up, and a little bit about your professional career and how come you're now, I think you're still in the army, but coming to the end of your tenure. Tell us where you are in that.
Yeah, I'm at a hinge point. I'm 48 years of age. About 2/3 of my life has been dedicated to the profession of arms. I joined the army at 17. That was my first career. But before that, I am a Queenslander, born rural Queensland, Mount Isa indeed. My father was a geologist, my mum was a pharmacist. Nothing like a little bit of lead on the brain first up. Spent most of my formative years in Brisbane on acreage, about 50 kilometres north of Brisbane. Joined the army at 17 as a private soldier. Really enjoyed it, and then applied for and won a position to the Royal Military College. And yeah, fast forward 30 years, I've had an amazing career. It hasn't been easy, but it's those challenges that I think that provide us all great growth opportunities. But I think when it comes to my work in my second career as the Chief Executive Officer and founder of a harm minimisation charity to combat anti-Semitism and foster peaceful coexistence, I developed a deep personal connection with Israel and Israelis from my time residing in Jerusalem, Israel, and operating in the 5 countries of the UN True Supervision Organization mission area: Israel, Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, and Egypt. And so fast forward to October 2023, where a pogrom, something I never expected to see in my lifetime, other than in history books. It occurred, and then October 9, that outrageous display at the Sydney Opera House. I looked to my wife, Tracina, who also lived with me in Jerusalem. Neither of us are Jewish, and we made the decision then and there that we wouldn't be bystanders, and we're now doing something about that. And that's the reason I'm across here in New York, not only to finish my MBA at NYU Stern School of Business, but a couple of hours ago I was at a international gathering of the Combat Anti-Semitism movement down in Midtown, and wonderful experiences with university students from all over the world, talking powerful resilience and overcoming adversities, mixed in with horrible treatment by faculty and fellow students, which, in my judgment, constitutes the worst case of victim blaming that I've seen in my lifetime, or I've even read about.
Michael, I want to come back to that work around anti-Semitism. I'd like to just sort of sequentially explore how you got to this point and tell me about, or tell us about your deployments in the Middle East. You served in Iraq and Afghanistan and all around the Levant, Lebanon and Syria, Jordan and Israel. How did that service shape your views on the complexities of the Middle East puzzle?
Soon after I got back from East Timor, so I was part of the International Forces East Timor that was commanded by the then Major General Peter Cosgrove in late 1999. I remember a mentor of mine, one of my commanding officers, said, "Michael, as part of your professional development, you really should read about all of Israel's wars." Being in the Royal Australian Armoured Corps, operations, strategy, and tactics were of great interest. And taking my mentor's advice, I read a lot about Israel's modern wars: 48, 56, 67, 73, the Intifadas, the Lebanon campaigns. And so being exposed to the tactics, operations, and strategy also surrounded me with the history, the politics, and the repeated peace attempts. And I must admit, it wasn't until after October 2023 that the penny had dropped, where I've been an ardent Zionist since my early 20s, because I believe in the political and cultural self-determination of the Indigenous people in their homeland. But looking more broadly and generally, some of the intolerance that I saw from Al Qaeda in Iraq, the Taliban, Haqqani network that were murdering civilians in Afghanistan, causing a lot of mischief in Pakistan, and then over to the Levant, where Muslim Brotherhood, supported by terrorist states and bedfellows, are causing all sorts of calamity, not only onto Israel, the Jewish state, but a country that comprises far more than simply, religious Jewish people. This is something that non-Jewish audiences, I think, don't fully understand and appreciate, with all of the misinformation that is pumped at them from social media and even failed legacy media media organisations, including the national broadcaster in Australia, I'm ashamed to mention, a young Indonesian Muslim lady that is was on my MBA course that I got to know after a couple of months when I explained what I was doing. The sort of jaw dropped, but she was silent. I talked about my personal experience and then explained some of the fabric of Israel. And she had absolutely no idea that 20% of Israelis were Arabs, 19 of that 20% were Muslims, because there's just so much misinformation out there. And one of the points I'd pass on respectfully to your Jewish readers is that we cannot assume that there's that level of knowledge about even the fundamentals that are relevant in this existential battle over information and narrative as well. That genuinely surprised me because I'd paid a lot of attention to reading and understanding the history and the causes of the conflict, but to assume can often make an ass of you and me.
Sure, sure. I share a personal story. I remember arguing once some years ago with a wonderful man, a Catholic priest, and I just literally pulled out facts that the only place where Christianity is growing in the entire Middle East, from Morocco all the way through to China, the one place in the world where Christianity is growing across that vastness, including Middle Asia, is Israel. And his jaw
Yep.
dropped. And I said, let's have a look at the data. And we had a look at it. And you're right. The assumptions that people make through information, disinformation, misinformation, it was an extraordinary moment. And you're right, Michael. We do. We make incredible assumptions because we assume people know what we know. And I think you're
Yeah.
right. Um, your experience with the United Nations. You wrote recently, critically, of course, of the United Nations Secretary General. For those that haven't, that was in the Jewish News a couple of weeks ago, and it was a very pointed attack. You've been involved in peacekeeping, and I know that you're still in the army. As much as you can share with us, based on your tenure with the UN Truce Supervision Organization, which sort of looks after the borders of much over there. What were the primary challenges faced by UN peacekeepers, and how do you think they can be addressed? And I am going to add to that a frame that the United Nations peacekeeping force in Lebanon. I'd like your assessment of that because there's arguments that of course, they couldn't keep Hezbollah away, which was the UN Security Council Resolution 1701. However, they did keep some sort of peace on the border until Israel and Hezbollah started after October 7th. Tell us about how the UN works there, what it's doing well, and what it isn't.
Yeah. So I think if it would be worth your listeners going back to the methodology that led to the establishment of the United Nations at the end of the Second World War. Of course, it was an iteration on the failed League of Nations that came into being after the First World War. My personal judgment is that that is humanity, need a United Nations, but at the moment it's not fit for purpose. And you're right, I was quite scathing in terms of an evidence-based manner on the current United Nations Secretary General that I think is one of the worst two United Nations Secretary Generals that we've seen since the 1940s. And for those that would actually like to look in some more detail into my thoughts, Australian Jewish News, I think the title of the article was Anatomy of a Failed Leader, where I sort of make the case on my quite fundamental concerns. But that being said, I think that the challenges we're facing with the United Nations are people problems. They're not organisational problems. We're seeing the ICC, the ICJ, a number of the bodies. UNRWA is just reprehensible and it should immediately be disestablished, and the responsibilities for the Palestinians transferred to UN High Commissioner for Refugees.
Or,
They're
or,
the
or
experts.
back to the Palestinians themselves. they do have agency here, and I've always made that point that I think
Well,
that
perhaps,
a Palestinian
perhaps
Authority
agency,
that
but
wants to run a state needs to look after its own people and do it in support and in concert with the United Nations, but not without taking agency.
yeah, look, that's a, these are all live issues, and my personal assessment on the Palestinian Authority is that they've got no track record of doing anything positive because they're not even unequivocally identifying Israel's right to exist in peace behind internationally recognized borders, as evidenced by the fact that in the work that they do, they still provide money to the families of terrorists that have got blood on their hands. But if I may just read to you an interesting quote that I was sent recently, the quote is, "It is perfectly clear that the Arab nations do not want to solve the Arab refugee problem. They want to keep it as an open sore, as an affront against the United Nations, and as a weapon against Israel. Arab leaders don't give a damn whether the refugees live or die." Now, the author of that quote was a gentleman by the name of Lieutenant General Sir Alexander Galloway, who was one of the first heads of the United Nations Relief and Works agencies. And that quote was published in the Daily Telegraph, wait for it, in 1952. And so, unfortunately, we haven't seen any progress from UNRWA other than to make the problem far more manifest. But stepping back out of UNRWA quickly, my experience and exposure to the United Nations, two significant departments that I had some dealings with:
Yep.
Department of Political Affairs, which is, the politicians, UNRWA special coordinator that I shared a building with, Tor Vennesland, a Norwegian at the time I was over there, and then the Department of Political Affairs, which is the chain of command true supervision organisation mapped under. My particular role was as the Deputy Chief of Staff, the military deputy to a Norwegian Major General for the first 3 months of my tour. But Adam, don't fall off your seat. There's challenges in the UN, and based on some squabbling between two permanent five nations in the Security Council over a completely unrelated mission in Africa, they froze my first boss's successor. And so for the next 2 years, I acted high duties in the absence of the Major General. And my responsibilities was the head of military, overtop 153 officers operating from 27 different troop contributing countries, including permanent five partners like the US, Russia, China, lots of non-traditional partners. We operated in Israel, up in Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, and Egypt, particularly in the South Litani River sector to north of the Blue Line that runs 130 kilometers from Rosh Hanikra in the west up to
Yep.
the Mount Hermon complex in the east. I have liaison officers up in Beirut, and I've been up to Beirut many times. Across into Syria, I had a team in Damascus. I spent a number of visits in Damascus before COVID, a big observation group in Kenitra, so the east of the area of separation. Another big group that resided in Tiberias that operated in the Golan. Then I had people that would go across to Amman, Jordan, and a small team that resided permanently in Cairo. They started in Ismailia, which is about halfway between Suez and Port Said on the western bank of the Suez Canal. And during my deployment, they moved across into Cairo. But are you happy if we sort of deep dive on UN Security Council
I, I,
Resolution 7?
yeah, I am because let's have a look at this idea that there's a whole lot of UN troops between the Litani and the Israeli border, and that's about, if I've got it right, about 28 kilometers, I think.
Thereabouts. Yep.
They're 28 kilometers in depth. So that's from Israel into Lebanon. And in that area, after the Second Lebanon War, the United Nations Security Council, as part of the disengagement process, said it would
Yep.
be a demilitarized zone. Now, given the Lebanese army's responsibilities to look after it and the Lebanese government, Of course, we know what's happened. And I was reading this morning in the papers, the Israeli papers, more caches of Hezbollah uncovered in southern Lebanon, again, under civilian houses and inside supposed hospitals. We know how all that works.
Yeah.
So Hezbollah has built a massive, massive army and armored storage facilities all through the area the United Nations said was demilitarized. And Michael, you've been there and you've got troops all over the ground. How, how does that come about? How,
Yeah.
how do we end up in that situation that there's this massive military force in a demilitarized zone?
Look, completely outrageous is the simple answer. And me coming in and into this mission, which was started before my mother was born, um, the first time I went up into Naqoura, where the headquarters of United Nations Interim Force Lebanon was, met the Major General, some of the other key leaders, and then did what was called a Blue Line tour, because I had unarmed observers that would be observing, monitoring, and reporting the terms of the various ceasefire agreements operating in that sector. Uh, Within about 1,000 meters of the headquarters of a division-sized force, so about 10,000 armed troops from a number of credible countries, there were yellow flags of the resistance everywhere. And I looked across to my Finnish predecessor, because he was with me as we were doing a change of command orientation tour. And I was like, what the hell? Aren't we here to keep these non-combatants, the terrorists, away to preserve not only the ceasefire, but to set the conditions for the peace? And there was a long discussion that wasn't satisfying at all for me. But for those that might have a legal background, do please go back into the UN Security Council Resolution 1701. Now, I'm not a military lawyer, but as a senior officer, I have to apply the rules of engagement and the operating parameters that are established by the United Nations Security Council, which is comprised of 15 members, 5 permanent members, each have veto powers, and then 10 rotations. And unfortunately, the world in which we live is where some of those parties that have veto powers have unfortunately got no interest in the problems in the Middle East being solved. And the simple way of explaining that is that if it doesn't involve Jews, it doesn't hit the news. And so the resolution was signed into effect, and it was about 2006. So it was in the Bush II presidency, his second term, where you've got parties such as China and Russia with veto powers that actually put the United States in a very difficult position. And how that actually related on the ground, we are on a Chapter 6 mandate, which is peacekeeping, not a Chapter 7 peace enforcement. So different to the African missions that are, say, hunting Boko Haram terrorists and killing them in Africa, or indeed the Chapter 7 mandate in Korea in the early 1950s. We're on a Chapter 6. And what that looked like on the ground is that we weren't permitted to search private property. And it led to, for those military, the people listening in that may have a military background, it led to the just outrageous circumstance where armed columns of UNIFIL were only permitted to operate on certain routes through the South Litani River sector. And a couple of months before I joined the mission, there was a story of an armored patrol that made a navigational area, so not a sector search to find to find terrorist infrastructure and report it or remove it. They made a navigational error. There was an illegal checkpoint that was established at the front and the rear. So Hezbollah, non-combatants, they were roughed up. They had weapons taken off them, and their gear was stolen because they didn't have the orders for opening fire or the rules of engagement to do anything about it. And unfortunately, there's been a number of shameful examples in the history of the United Nations, like the Kabaya massacre in Rwanda, like the massacre in Srebrenica, where combatants would move past the peacekeepers that were armed they'd take people and they'd murder them because the soldiers were not permitted to apply lethal or escalate up to and including lethal force to help those people. And so the fault lies in the resolution that was established in 2006. I mentioned at the start of the presentation, to assume can make an ass of you and me. It's really important for us to look into what the actual writing is, because therein lies the challenge. And
Yeah.
if I was asked my assessment of what to do here with UNIFIL, I would collapse it, because many of the world's democracies are at a position where the defence dollar and indeed our budgets aren't balancing. We can't any longer throw good money after bad. In my judgment, there will be a more sustainable peace that if Hezbollah try their encroachment south of the Litani River, the IDF have shown that their intelligence and their targeting is just another level. That's deterrence. Someone does something,
Yeah.
they're detected, they're engaged. It sends a very strong message.
It's a big argument, and I think you and I um, could have that conversation for a long time about, or another episode. And I think I'd like to, and bring Mike Kelly on as well, with you, Michael, to, senior colonels who understand the military application. If the UN's not there, right, then it becomes a question of deterrence and firepower in order to keep combatants apart from each other. If the UN is there, and yes, I understand, of course, that Hezbollah ignored it, but it does give some opportunity to create a mechanism outside of purely deterrence and standoff-based power in order to give the parties an ability to keep the peace. I, you know, it. I know that's a complicated argument, and I sense the difficulties of it. Let me give you one example. Then I want to come back to the 2023 Foundation. When Henry Kissinger negotiated the separation accords between Syria and Israel after 1973, those accords worked. There has been peace between Syria and Israel, literally across the border, since 1974, 74, 75. But there has not been, you know, like there has been in Lebanon, and there certainly has not been as the same in Gaza. There's been pretty much a peace. Let's put it like that. And the UNSO has been based in Kennetra and has kept most of those borders clear. I understand the back and forward of it, but in Lebanon, it's a complete disaster, right? The UN is
Let me
there,
come
and
in on
that's a
that quickly.
disaster by the combatants. Not, it often depends, I think, on the will of each of the people involved. Don't you agree?
Let me come in on that quickly. So the geography and the topography of southern Lebanon, it's complex terrain, and so the fabric of the Lebanese community, and it's a beautiful community. And what has happened since the civil war, what 40 odd years ago, is heartbreaking, because it could be the Paris of the Middle East. You've got Christian, Maronite, Orthodox. You've got Muslim, both Sunni, Shia, and Druze are the four major ethnicities. In the south, the only villages that Hezbollah has just put all of its terrorist infrastructure is in the Shia villages. I've had that put to me by people that have access to secret information. It's been declassified, not providing any secrets from Australia whatsoever. But
Sure.
it's only the Shia villages. Unfortunately, what we've seen with some of the recent policy changes as it related to the Ayatollahs in Iran, after Trump won, came in, the Biden administration changed the policy and allowed a lot of oil to be sold by Iran to some of the world's worst regimes. So Syria, Venezuela, North Korea, China, as I understand it, and Russia. And that just awashed the region with literally hundreds of billions of dollars. And I think it's caused a lot of the mess that we've seen since October 2023. Um, Lebanon is just awash with money, sadly, um, that from the Iranians. It's all in the hands of Hezbollah. I think things that the international community can do is the maximum pressure campaign, letting that money wash out, and then supporting Lebanon to throw off the the shroud that is Hezbollah. It will not be easy. My judgment is that it's going to get worse before it gets better, because the Druze, the Christians, even the Sunni Muslims, they're not strong enough to compete with Hezbollah now, even after the Radwan forces and the leadership have been decimated. They're still big enough to murder any of the leaders, to extort.
How big
That
is Hezbollah still, since its decapitation? How big is it now still?
Well, look, it's been dealt a series of blows, but
It's still about 50,000 combatants.
look, I would only be guessing and
Okay.
speculating, but I think
It's still a
uh,
power. That's what we're
what
hearing.
I'm happy
Yep.
to speak with authority on is that in the event that there was a move by Christians, Druze, and Sunni to throw off Hezbollah, they would probably lose all of their leaders and their combatants, because they wouldn't be strong enough to defeat that at the moment.
Wow.
But yeah, look, I personally see that UNIFIL has lulled the international community into a false sense of security, not Israel, because you just look at the way that they were able to penetrate the networks, the activities and actions around the pages, and indeed eliminating Nasrallah in his bunker up in Beirut. When I explain that to non-defense people, I liken it to a Leonard Cohen poem sung by Andrea Bocelli. It's about as close to perfection as human beings can get. It's just an amazing series of actions that I think will be studied by military professionals and intelligence agencies
For a
forever.
long time.
But
Yeah, it was
Syria,
something.
Syria is billiard table flat. Lebanon is complex terrain. That explains, I think, how Hezbollah have been able to penetrate so closely. Where in Syria, the kinetic targeting, what the Israelis, when I was there, used to describe as the campaign between the wars. They were targeting and eliminating convoys, infrastructure in the airport in Damascus, Rafik Hariri in Beirut, convoys all the way into Iraq, and any penetration in southwestern Syria near Quneitra, it would be rolled up really quickly. And also there's big Druze villages near Mount Hermon. They take no part in these shenanigans. And in the south, they were Sunni Muslims, and so they weren't part of the Alawite Assad ruling regime, which of course was rolled up by the HTS terrorists, the Sunni
Yeah,
terrorists,
and
late 24.
it's a disaster there now. They're targeting, you know, we we can talk on and on and on, and I am conscious of time, Michael, and I would like you to come back with Mike Kelly, and we'll make that arrangement after and talk about the military aspects of what's been going on since October 7th. You know, we all know about the pages and we all know about Hezbollah and that, but I want to park that if we can, because one of the reasons why we're speaking today is Peter Lerner introduced me to you because of the work that you've done with the 2023 Foundation. And many of our listeners won't know of it. So I wanted to ask you about it. What is it? What is its work? What inspired you to establish it? And how does your military background influence its mission to combat anti-Semitism and promote peaceful coexistence?
So I think starting with the military, I've learned through my decades in service and command in war that on the horns of a dilemma, I ought to do what in time I regret less. And so after not only the pogrom of October 7, but the Opera House and the outrageous anti-Semitism that we've seen across the Western world since, my wife and I made the decision that we wouldn't be bystanders. And so I founded the 2023 Foundation, a harm minimisation charity to combat anti-Semitism and foster peaceful coexistence. Now, soon after October 9, like many of us, I would see on my social media feed from friends like school friends I went to Brisbane Grammar School with 30 years ago, posting from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. And so that's an incredibly violent statement. I direct messaged the guy, hey mate, I saw your post. I lived over in Israel for a couple of years. That's not what's going on over there. Do you mind if we have a chat? And I found that I was getting no purchase whatsoever. Indeed, people that I've known for, a good portion of my life just started shouting at me and cancelling me.
Yeah.
And so I actually pulled off social media, not getting into flame wars, but I started thinking through what would actually make a difference. And about that time, I read a biography on President Harry S. Truman. The biography was Cyrus. And of course, when he was US president, he was instrumental in the founding of the State of Israel. And I came across the example of the Fulbright Scholarship, which was established by Senator J. William Fulbright. And fast forward 80 years on, it's bringing 8,000 people into US tertiary institutions from all over the world, not only educating them, but building cross-cultural linkages. And I thought that's an exemplar that I'll be able to apply to combat anti-Semitism. Another biography, Benjamin Franklin, a quote that resonated was, tell me, I forget, teach me, I may remember, but involve me and I learn. And so, in my judgment, there's no better way to combat anti-Semitism than through lived personal experience. And so, the basis of my foundation is to connect with reasonable, open-minded non-Jews and incentivize their travel to Israel, whether it be a placement in undergraduate or postgraduate courses or short courses, thematic visits, industry placements, a non-Jewish birthright, essentially finding something that interests a person and link them up with people that are very similar in Israel. And one example that my team and I are developing is around Pride March in June in Tel Aviv, because you and I know that Israel is a beacon of tolerance in the region. It's the only place that you can be openly gay and lesbian without any fear of repercussions. And
Yep.
personally, I've got many dear gay and lesbian friends in Israel, gay and lesbian friends in Australia, connecting with them, bringing them across for an activity. And while over there, getting around, if someone really wants to look for the genocide or the apartheid, it's like fantastic. We'll have a good look for it. I've been over there. I haven't seen it, but I will help you have a good hunt for it. To understand Israel and all of its perfect imperfections. And for me, that's the influencing effect. You can't have a conversation, in my judgment, with someone in a cafe in Sydney and allow them to understand, because for non-Jews, Israel is not a bucket list destination. And one of the challenges I think we're facing in Australia and indeed other Western capitals is where I hear Tel Aviv, I have a mental model of Sydney, Australia, because they're both beachside cities, wonderful, plural, and tolerant. But I think for non-Jews that are brought up on, Israel as it's interpreted by the Australian Broadcasting Corporation and the bigots that infect that formerly credible national carrier. I think when they hear Tel Aviv, they've got a mental model of Mogadishu, Somalia. And in my view, you cannot understand the nuances without interacting with the environment. And the basis of the 2023 Foundation, after Israel wins the war, I'll be part of helping Israel win the peace.
Okay, so you live the maxim, Michael, to know Israel is to see Israel. And
Yep.
I love that description, non-Jewish birthright, and to bring those of us who do missions to Israel in our various forms, that's the purpose. When see it, make up your own mind about these things. I wanted to reflect on insights into anti-Semitism that you've had. You wrote a piece on called "Eyes on the Wolf at the Door: not on the leak in the floor. And
Yeah.
you address the urgency in that piece of combating anti-Semitism. What strategies do you believe are most effective for addressing this issue? And I'm going to ask that in Australia, in our context, and in
Yeah.
globally, because the genie's
Yeah.
out of the bottle, and everybody talks about we can't get it back in, but what do we do?
No, that's right. No, I think I won't be saying anything revelatory with your listeners that the challenges that we're confronting are as bad as everyone thinks. Israel is winning, but it is involved in an existential military conflict with seven proxies and a terrorist state. Israel is winning, but this fight is existential. The Jewish diaspora and people like me are involved in an existential struggle over information and narrative. And the basis of that particular article was all about simplifying the narrative. So, eyes on the wolf at the door, that is the jihadist, the people that will murder my children and yours, not the leak in the floor. One of the things that deeply frustrated me as I was speaking with Jewish members of the community is at a time that we'd seen a second pogrom, that is the Amsterdam pogrom. November 7, what I would see on social media is Donald Trump this, Donald Trump that, Bibi this, Bibi that, all being incredibly critical on politicians on the right in democracies. And for me, we have to simplify the narrative because Gentiles, the people that we need to influence to help them understand, it's too easy for them to make the link if all they ever hear from, Jewish people they may know in a Western society that Bibi is the devil reincarnate, as is his brother, President Trump. It's too easy for people that don't know any better to make the logic leap that, well, maybe Nasrallah is a freedom fighter. Maybe Sinwar is a freedom fighter. And so we were doing ourselves a massive disservice in my judgment. And so keeping it simple and just explaining some of the fundamentals is, I think, something that we do have agency in.
Mm. So tell us further about, I think you're right. Tell our audience further about some of the initiatives of your foundation, some of the specific programs you've talked about, missions, birthright. I know you were talking to our friend Peter Lerner about some
Yep.
activities there with the Histadrut. Please tell us some of
Yep.
the other initiatives you're undertaking, Michael.
Absolutely. It's all in the planning phase because, in my judgment, there's still going to be a worsening circumstance in a bit of Israel for some time. But I've learned through my military career, big problems are best dealt with like an elephant, a small bite at a time. That's the way problems are resolved. The way you choke on the elephant is trying to take the second bite first. And so, what I'm talking about is not revelatory. Many Jewish groups have been doing this for some time. I don't need to reinvent the wheel. I just need to apply things that actually work with the diaspora to a different target audience. And in my early planning, the 2023 foundation is nascent. I only established in July 2024. Since then, I built a non-executive team of directors and I built a big executive team. For anyone that is interested in understanding a little bit more, do please Google 2023 Foundation or me on LinkedIn, Colonel Michael Scott CSC, and you can understand. And for the Jewish team members listening in, you may actually recognize a couple of familiar faces because it's an incredible group of people that are non-executive directors and also executives. But we've identified 7 proof of concept activities, a number of thematic visits. The first one we're looking at is engaging with a veterans group. And of course, 2 significant days in Australian military history, 25th of April, Anzac Day, and the idea from 2026 is to do a dawn service at the Commonwealth War Graves in Jerusalem as part of a 10-day activity where they not only see Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Memorial, the Tolerance Museum in Jerusalem, of course, the Old City, the etc., down to Tel Aviv and Yaffo, up to Haifa to meet the Druze, see the Baha'i Gardens, understand the cosmopolitan nature of Israel. The second one out of the veterans and sorry, Anzac Day and Beersheba Day, the 31st of October, where Australian Light Horse defeated the Ottoman Turks by charging the wells and securing Beersheba on the 31st of October 1917. That's actually the first activity we're looking at conducting in 2025. Pride March, Tel Aviv, June. The nearest to the Sydney Gay and Lesbian Mardi Gras in Australia is Pride March in June. And then, of course, Israel is the startup nation. As an MBA candidate, as a mature student, one of the ways that I can actually connect with people with a social conscience that may otherwise be vulnerable to misinformation by the ABC and some of the failed media is things like green energy or recycling. Find something that interests a person, bring them across, let them meet Israelis that are just like them. Ideally, the entrepreneurs might be able to explore development opportunities, either bringing technology from Australia into Israel or vice versa, because those people that I will in time help mix, their success is my success, because the best information operation is effective action that is then messaged. Outside of the thematic visits, non-Jewish birthright, kibbutz placement, it was significant in Israel in the 70s and 80s, but it's really fallen off. And we're actually seeing the problems now because non-Jews are not going to Israel, but for small numbers. Scholarships and placements. And I think one of the unique propositions that the 2023 Foundation operate is that we've got a wonderful psychologist with us, because after people get back into Australia, we don't just want them to disperse in the ether. We're building an alumni program where we maintain that connection so that the people that we've supported to go to Israel, they don't just bleed away into the silent majority, that they actually maintain their level of connectivity in activity.
Great. And what are you doing with the Histadrut?
So yeah, specifically in the Histadrut, I've got many dear friends in the Labour Friends of Israel, and I think that there's a wonderful opportunity to connect with members of the Labour Party and unions to get them across and to speak with the Histadrut. I think some of the unions that we will look at progressing in the short term is in health services. There's nothing like getting up to Hadassah and seeing, Israeli Arabs that are working as doctors and nurses to understand that there's no apartheid in Israel. Education sector, international schools. So the target audience is non-Jewish. They don't need to be Hebrew speakers, because in health as well as education, that's amenable. And I think that's one of the ways that the broad strategy in end state is to grow people like Bob Hawke that understood how important Israel is. And I actually agree with Bob Hawke of blessed memory that if the bell tolls on Israel, it tolls for us all. As a Gentile, I see that the challenges that amazing country is facing is directly linked to the safety and security of me and my family, even in distant Australia. And so back to where I started, on the horns of a dilemma, I won't be a bystander. I'll act with my conscience, and I'll do all I can in my power to make tomorrow better than we're seeing yesterday and today.
Michael, the civilizational challenge, let's call it for what it is, the civilizational challenge we face through this, and Israel is just the edge of this much, much larger challenge that we face. What are your long-term goals for the 2023 Foundation,
Yeah.
and how do you envisage its role in shaping perceptions, not just about Israel, but about Western civilization and its role in the world?
So I think when I read the biography on Cyrus and I understood the nature of the Fulbright scholarship, it gave me a level of confidence that I could think big. And so where I'm starting in Australia, we're a country of 28 million people, but anti-Semitism is a global challenge. I'm aspiring to prove the concept in Australia and then scale it scaling and expanding to other countries with a large Jewish diaspora. And that's the big reason why I'm across here in New York, speaking with people, introducing myself, because the aspiration is that I scale working with like-minded Gentiles in other countries such as the United States, Canada, New Zealand, Germany, the United Kingdom, France, Chile, Argentina. My time in Israel, sitting atop 153 officers that essentially rotated 3 or 4 times. It exposed me to about 400 or 500 individuals from all over the world. It's never been as easy as it is now to maintain contact. And there's amazing people in Chile, in Argentina, and a number of other countries that I'm still connected with that are really interested in doing their part after a couple of proof of concept activities that will provide us the metrics that we can actually go to donors, partners, etc., and demonstrate the benefit that we're offering. In terms of my end state, if the 2023 Foundation is still driving towards its mission and vision, 100 years from now, I will have prevailed, because the name 2023, it's not enshrining the violence of Hamas on October 7. 2023 was my tipping point that never again will always occur unless good people stand up and do something. The history throughout the last couple of thousand years is that anti-Semitism has been a scourge that has never gone away. And if it happened in 2023, it could very easily happen again in 2083 or 2123. I want to build something that's strategic and significant and lasting. It's all about connecting people and building, to quote the Rebbe of blessed memory, a light can dispel a lot of darkness. The first couple of people that are members of the foundation alumni, they'll be vulnerable. But when we get tens, hundreds,
Yes.
that's going to cast a lot of lumens, and that's the ripple effect.
Oh, Michael, that's just so wonderful. I'm going to send you my contact list of all my friends and work colleagues over years who don't know what to do. Who,
Yep,
when I share my experience, and like Louisa and I have shared it many times over dinner, and there's silence. They just don't
yep,
know what to do. They don't know what to say, not because they're not good people,
yep,
because being an upstander on your own is very difficult.
yep.
But being an
It's lonely to
upstander,
get attacked. Yep.
with a group of like-minded people is much easier to do it. So, listeners, to all of us here, let's send all our friends to the 2023 Foundation. Let's give introductions to not only the foundation and the work that it does, but to Michael, to you as well. And if people want to make contact with you, I've got your details, and feel free to let me know. Of course, contact Michael directly through LinkedIn, through the 2023, and also through our show. Michael, it's been an absolute treat to have you, and a real inspiration that in the face of so much that is wrong, that one person can stand up and say, I'm going to do something about that. And that is in short supply in the world today at many levels. We wish you well in your travels in New York and in the finish of your MBA. I'm going to reach out to Mike Kelly, and I think there's an episode for the three of us to have a chat about the military operations of what's
Yep.
happened. I think that would be a really interesting topic. And all power to you. Thank you for coming on to our show today. Be well, be safe, Colonel Michael Scott. Thank you.
Thank you, Adam.